on, other than that vibrating noise that you are not paying attention to at all while we're having this amazing conversation. Hi, James.
Hey, Jessica, how are you doing?
I'm good. Mike,
Thrilled to be here today.
you look very nice today.
Thank you. I put on my happy colors.
It is a very happy and joyful situation we have over here between the chair and the shirt. You're just like giving me light.
Absolutely.
You're
thrilled to
giving
be here with
everyone
the
here
Honest
light.
family.
This is awesome because, we got to break bread officially last night.
We did.
And chop it up and talk about all the things. And you got to meet my family.
Share family stories.
We did share family stories. And, not too long after you joined us, first of all, I'm just so honored and grateful that you are really helping us turn into the company that I know we have in us. You are the chairperson of our board and really guiding the leadership team to show up in the best way possible. And quickly after you joined, I learned about this incredible book that you co-authored with your daughter. And I was like, as a parent, I was like, wow, that is a dream. Not my daughter's dream, my dream. And I'm not really sure how it went down with you. But then I learned about how it actually happened and just how cool it is to be able to be in a place in your life where you get to collaborate with your daughter and create something that is so important and have a very thoughtful and provocative and actionable stance in how you want to operate in the world and frankly, guide others to operate with this same bravery and courage. And this Fireside Chat is really all about anti-racist leadership. Boom. I mean, you almost need to just mic drop on that title. So I think the way to open it is, how did this book come to be? And maybe you can open with sort of what it stands for you.
Sure. I'll make a couple comments. I maybe 3 years ago was working on a project with one of the companies that I served on the board of. The CEO and the board asked me to help them kind of think through their diversity, equity, inclusion work. My oldest daughter, Krista, is a brilliant writer and researcher. She happened to have some time to join this project with her dad, and we started to find kind of a mutual passion for this work. We ultimately ended up doing this work with 2 or 3 other clients. We launched a consulting practice, Culture Design Lab. We looked at each other at some point and said there is a viewpoint that isn't present around this conversation of anti-racist leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion from a CEO, operating executive perspective. And there's really nowhere you can find in this space where you've got the voice and the input of a millennial bringing their view to the table of this work. And we were really co-partners in this project. And one of the ways I often start is I read the first paragraph of the book, which was really inspired by the tragic murder of George Floyd. My daughter Krista comes to me, and we had headed down the path of completing the book project, and we're starting to shop the project. But she said, "Dad, I've got a different way to start the book, and then I'll read the first paragraph of the book, and then I'll give you the behind-the-scenes story of some of the commentary related." This book is not apolitical. This book is explicitly anti-racist, pro-Black, pro-LGBTQIA, and feminist. This book takes the stance that Black Lives Matter, that LGBTQIA plus rights are human rights, that people of all abilities deserve respect and access, and that people of all genders have the right to sovereignty over their bodies and identities. This book acknowledges that capitalism is built on a foundation of systemic racism, and that to have a truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive work environment, we must acknowledge the historic and present injustices faced by marginalized people. So, to take you back to that time in late May, June of 2020, my daughter comes to me overnight. We know we've got a project meeting with the team, working with us to edit and kind of craft the project. Like I just did, I read this start to the book, and one of the members of the team said, "James, you're a mainstream business person. Do you care if you ever work again?" And my comment is, no, not really. There's going to be plenty of people that have values that line up with my values, but at this moment in time, it's actually more important that we craft something that matters, that'll be a catalyst for a different discussion in the world. And this was all driven by my 28-year-old daughter at the time, just given her passion. And she was actually, more aware of what needed to happen than even her dad at the time. And this just ended up being a beautiful partnership, and her voice can be heard throughout the book. But this start really summarizes how we view the world and how we'd like to catalyze this conversation moving forward. Where we call things what they are, we've moved well beyond the point in time where we can watch injustices happening in the workplace or anywhere in the world and not call things what they are.
I mean, it's heavy and powerful, and it leads me to my second question, which is your journey. Given that the world, frankly, wasn't really set up for people that look like you to be successful, how did you do it? Tell us a little bit about maybe some of the magic of you and how you've been able to navigate and be wildly successful.
I think really no magic, a lot of hard work, a little bit of luck, but the kind of the roots of my story, working class family, born in St. Louis, Missouri. Rose and James White, my parents are, fortunately still with us. My dad turns 90 this year, and mom is 84. My dad was a sky cap at the St. Louis airport up until 2 years ago with the pandemic. I talk a little bit about that in the book. My mom, probably the most instrumental person, in my life in terms of, putting me on a path for hard work and success. Again, I'm the first member of my family to graduate from college. So I'm an unlikely person to be sitting here before you to have, run a public company. I sit on, public and private company boards over the last 20 years. My first job out of college was with the Coca-Cola company, and Jessica and I talked about this a little bit over dinner. So if you can imagine, and this is 1983, a young man, first member of his family to graduate from college, first professional job, kind of quote unquote, in the family. I'm assigned to sales territory that is in southeast Missouri and into Arkansas. And, kind of my first week on the job as we're walking through with the territory is that I'd be selling Minute Maid orange juice, and my supervisor at the time says, well, there is one city in Arkansas, which is the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan. We're going to have to take that out of your territory. So I'll just let that kind of soak in, for a young person excited to have their first job working with one of the most fantastic corporations in America, the Coca-Cola company. And that's kind of my first week on the job where I have to, kind of think about that. And if you think about the entirety of this sales territory, there's something called sundown towns. So sundown towns are towns where if you're black or brown, you probably shouldn't be in those towns after dark. And I remember one very specific incident where I literally go in and I'm selling Minute Maid orange juice. The store manager says, James, we heard you were in town, and we would just suggest that you're not here after dark. And this is actually somebody who's trying to be helpful to me. And you don't know that as a young person, first job, but as I look back on it, probably most of my sales territory, and I lived in Springfield, Missouri. Again, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, which is a larger city, but my initial job was outside of the two large cities in the state of Missouri, which would be Kansas City and St. Louis. And it was almost like going back in time many, many years as I think about, kind of that first job. And I share that story and hadn't shared the story before 2020, but as we went through the racial reckoning, these are the kinds of stories that allow people to walk, at least for a brief moment, in someone else's shoes. And there's a good friend of mine who has had a career that would likely parallel my own. He was the CEO of Krispy Kreme Donuts. I was the CEO at Jamba Juice. He's white, I'm black. And as I share that story with him, and we're roughly the same age, if he had to walk in my shoes and that's his first job, it's probably unlikely that he ends up where he ended up. And I just share that to share a bit of perspective. So that's, kind of one part of the journey. One of the other things that I talk about in the book is the fact that if you're black or brown, you always have to prove it again and prove it again and prove it again from a career standpoint, or at least that was the experience that I've had as a leader. And I was addressing a group of about 1,000 people at a company called Medallia. They're in the experience management area. And the CEO, we were doing a fireside chat like this one. And when I make that point, I see that I've startled him by making that point because it's something that he's never thought about. He's a Scottish executive, and just that's never been his experience. So he rocks back and forth. He looks at the audience and said, you know what, there are blacks here at Medallia that probably don't understand their full potential, nor have we thought about their potential. And really my point is, I watch many of my peers promoted often on potential. For me, whenever I got the next big promotion, I share a story where I ran most of the commercial operation at Nestle Purina. I had 70% of the business by the time I was promoted to vice president the first time. So that's kind of an easy decision to promote James at that point. So, kind of years kind of toiling.
You've already been doing the job.
I've been doing the job for years.
For years before you get that promotion. It's interesting.
So those are just a couple stories just to kind of set the stage.
Right. And what is different for someone who is white is people get plucked because of their potential and get identified at various stages because of their potential before they're even close to fulfilling the duties of what that job entails. Whereas what you're saying is you actually were already doing all of it before they acknowledged your worth and then decided that they were going to give you that promotion. And I just think it's wildly eye-opening. I never heard it articulated quite that way. And you give so many different amazing examples of that in the book, but then also many different tips and tools for middle management. And I thought that was so interesting. It's not even necessarily, yes, it needs to start with leadership, and leaders need to really look at themselves first and foremost and see where their bias might lie or things that they may need to overcome, and have uncomfortable conversations. But I love how you have such an operational approach to, hey, the people who are running the day-to-day of the business, here are some tools or ways in which they can show up for people that may be overseen. And maybe you can talk about a little bit of some of those tactics or tools.
Yeah, I think the main messages that we have in the book, the very first one is the work of anti-racist leadership or diversity, equity, and inclusion is the work of culture. You can't separate this work from culture, so it's not an event, it's not a set of groups. It has, at the best companies, it's built into the fabric of the organization deeply. And it starts at the top of the organization. It's not work that you can delegate. The CEO he or she would never delegate culture. That's a point we emphasize as we talk about the book. The other really important aspect,
model that behavior themselves.
Well, they model the behavior, and they're close to the behavior. It's a part of their day-to-day, the way they live, because that's where the organization is going to take their cues.
100%.
The second point that I'd make, the most important part of the organization to having sustainable change of any sort is the middle management. So most of us in any organization experience our companies with our direct leadership. So I think about that as kind of the middleman of an organization. And I sat on the board of Panera Bread, so they've got 2,000 cafes. So there are about 150 leaders that manage multiple cafes. So if you think about their large, 100,000 plus person organization, most of the people in the organization experience Panera through that group of 150 people. So the point that I make is that, from an HR and leadership perspective, we've got to give that set of leaders the tools that they need, the processes that they need to build more inclusive environments where we can all bring our full selves to work and all have the same equal access to the opportunities inside the organization. And I often get questions around, well, what if some of that group doesn't get it? What do you do? I've got a good friend of mine. I sit on the board of the Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose. Doug Conan is the chairman of that board. Doug was the CEO at Campbell Soup, and he talks about when he came in there to transform the company and call it, there were 300 middle managers at Campbell Soup. For him to put in place the culture that he expected that was more inclusive, more diverse, he changed out over the course of time 2/3 of that leadership team. So that's kind of my answer to the question. You give everybody the opportunity to really get it, and you give them time to get it, but at some point, if people don't line up with the values of your organization, you free up their futures to go do something else.
I love that. Free up their future. Really interesting pieces that you emphasize is like business often happens in spaces outside of the office, bars, golf courses, retreats, etc. And there's a lot of cultural barriers in these spaces that many people don't recognize. How did you address or adapt to these informal networking spaces, and what are some alternatives, if any, to building that camaraderie?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with what I think the alternatives are, and I know you guys are focused on many of those kind of things, the work that you do in the community. Most of us have access to being able to participate in those kind of things. When I was CEO at Jamba, we found, we're trying to be a healthier brand, so we did physical kinds of things, or things in the community, or giving back inside of schools. Those were the kinds of places we would organize. But if I think about most of my career, golf was a big part of where the real work happened outside of business. For me, you've heard my background, so it's unlikely that I grew up playing golf. And I never really adapt. I don't have anything against golf. I haven't had time even at this point to pick up that as a sport. I like beautiful golf courses as much as the next person. So that wasn't a part of, really my past. So I had to try to work my way around that as a barrier. And I just make this point for any of us that are leading people, just to make sure that the rituals that we have, the systems, formal and informal, we should make sure that those are equally accessible to really all of the folks in the organization. We truly believe anti-racist leadership is going to be a core competency moving forward. We hope this will be a catalyst for a conversation around this, is a critical discussion point. One of the points that my daughter really emphasized, she heard me talk a lot about empathy. She said, well, Dad, what if folks don't naturally have empathy? Can empathy be learned? So in addition to, telling a bit of my own story in this book as a way to move this discussion forward, we interviewed 24 other executives, and we'd often ask people how and where they develop empathy. Is it a learnable skill? How should you think about it? The way we kind of sum it up in the book is we hope that everyone can focus on developing empathy and hopefully translate that empathy to compassion. But this really is work that is about taking action, big action and small actions, even if it's just educating yourself.
We all come from different backgrounds. We all have our different, I'm not going to call them issues, I'm going to say challenges. Everyone comes to the table with what happened that morning, that day, their childhood, their experiences. Some people have had to build up such an armor because life wasn't handed to them in the same way maybe that this guy or that gal's life was. And so they can't help but carry that armor every day and every day to feel like a fight or struggle. And sometimes they don't even realize what they're bringing to the table, while others are just sort of floating and it feels so easy and they're just gliding. And there was one thing that I really felt, one tactic that I really was drawn to, which was some leader in the book, I forgot who it was exactly, said that they force people who have very different experiences to come and have conversation. And there's something called like the left-hand column. And then when somebody wants to speak up and say, instead of it just coming out like a raw emotion, it's sort of like I'm speaking from my left-hand column space, which is basically I'm coming at this through the intersection of what makes me. For me, it's Mexican, military family, mixed family, grew up with my grandparents, the struggle of what that experience was like, and a very like Catholic family, male dominant family. And so being self-aware enough to say like, I'm coming at this from my left-hand column in conversation with somebody to like make space for people to have to speak their truth.
Sure.
I thought was amazing. And it feels like it treats people with dignity. It gives them the space, and it's a healthy way to have these difficult conversations at work.
And that example is one that comes from my experience at Nestle Purina, and we trained the entire organization on a common communication language so we would be able to put ourselves in a place to have difficult discussions. And the left-hand column, the way to think about it visually is that thought bubble of what you don't say. You respond, but you're actually thinking something totally different. So the left-hand column allows us in a non-threatening, non-accusatory, non-judgmental way to put a difficult, so it would allow me to put a difficult discussion in front of Jessica in a safe way. And then as an organization, we all know what that means. And it allows us to just really understand where the other person is coming from. And there's a set of tools like that specific tool that we talked about. Where I thought you were headed, one of the things that I love to do is to immerse people in different cultural experiences. And one of the things that we did both at the Gillette Company and when I was at Nestle Purina is we would recruit at the Black MBA conference.
Oh, yeah.
Julie
I love this
those days. We would recruit at a Latinx MBA conference. It was Nishimba was the name of the conference at the time, and then we did work with women's conferences. But it was really interesting as you would bring folks into those different environments and everybody around them for 2 or 3 days, everybody in the elevator is black, everybody on the floor is black. Just the impact and the experience that people, just that short couple days of experience. And there's one specific example where we sent a male leader to a women's conference. So envision a conference, there's 500 women at this conference, there's maybe 10 men in the audience. And there's a little bit of jostling from the stage where there are people saying, it's great, Nick, that you could join us today. And that goes on for the full day. The punchline is this executive was so exhausted being the only one of 10 men in a group of 500 for that day. He was so exhausted he could not go to dinner. Just was so emotionally shaken up. And the experience I asked people to think about, if that's your experience every day for your entire career, how taxing that might be. So that's another example of, just walking a minute or two in somebody else's shoes and being open to that as a leader.
Are there any key experiences that you have had, if any, and what are some tactics that you have sort of leaned on it to address those moments where it just feels like too much? This guy, he spent one day around a bunch of women, and you're like, I've spent my entire career being me in this sea of whiteness. And are there any tools or takeaways that you have done over the years to help with your mental health or to relieve stress?
Well, exercise is probably at least for me, the best kind of stress reliever. But in terms of navigating, lots of different kinds of organizations, for me, I stay optimistic. I try to build relationships cross-functionally. Because the way you build a career, in my experience, is kind of laterally. I try to be of service to other folks across functions, and that's always served me well from a leadership perspective. And I always have a clear mission on what I'm trying to get done, so I'm not easily discouraged. One of the pieces of feedback that I've always given to colleagues is I always leave or exit a business on my own terms. So I even talk about my Nestle Purina experience. I can remember there was a big job that the organization was changing. There were going to be 6 big commercial jobs. We were moving to cross-functional teams at the time. And, in my heart of hearts, there might have been 1 or 2 people in that organization better than me for those jobs, but there is no way there were 6 people in that company better than me for that job. But this would have been one of those examples where folks said, well, we really don't know you. And they found 6 people to put in those jobs. And I had to, it was one of those times where I had to dig deep and kind of, really live to what I had always said, is that, you pick yourself up and you keep going. So I was disappointed over a weekend, but when I walked back in on Monday, I was ready to go. The long and the short of this story, the job that I thought I got banished to was in a part of the company, and again, I'm older than everybody in this room, so this would have been when Walmart was still emerging and Target was still emerging. So I end up with Walmart and Target in a group working on those emerging clients. So it ended up being really the best experience of a lifetime, and ultimately every one of the people that beat me for those jobs, most of them 5 years later reported to me. So optimism, I think, is important. Knowing your own true north is important. And then anything that you can do to work on your own physical well-being and kind of mental health, I think, has never been more important than it is today.
It's true. I feel like here a lot of people do find their meditation in connecting to their body, yoga, fitness, walking, something where you can really physically connect, for sure, for me as well. Economic advancement is one dimension of progress, but people of color face many challenges in healthcare, mental health, environmental justice, and more that affect their overall wellness. What are some aspects of Black wellness that matter most to you, and how can business work with communities to support Black wellness? So the last question was more around the individual you as James, but I think overall, as a community, as a conversation around this book, and us and the leaders in this room, what does that look like? And do you have any advice or direction?
I think the thing that I'm committed to personally. I mean, this is now my life's work. I had no idea that I would be in this space. I've had success, and I'm using the book project and my voice and my platform to drive at racial justice and equity, and that was spurred for me by the events of 2020 that reshaped the world. So for me, I look for every opportunity personally that I have to drive systemic change, whether it's in the boardroom or the various organizations that I'm a part of. The advice that I would have for companies and leaders and individuals is really, even if it's just being an ally to a colleague in a different way, or spending time with different people inside the organization, or if you're leading people, making sure that you create the space, for people to do their best work and bring their full selves to the work. From an organizational perspective, I love the work that we do here in the communities and the things that are really important to the communities that we're a part of. Specifically for me, if I get to exact places of kind of impact, I'm a big proponent of Girls Inc. My sister is CEO of Girls Inc. in St. Louis. That's a place I give back in and around STEM-related activities. Going to the boardroom, I'm an advisor to Black Women on Boards, which is a dynamic organization founded in the last 2 years. Likely catalyzed by, the events of 2020 as well, with 200 of the most powerful women that are on boards or aspiring to be on boards, Black women. Look that organization up. They're a dynamic organization doing fantastic work, and there's a woman that I mentor, Merlene Chantel, who's the co-founder of that organization, just a dynamo. The other thing is I make investments, and I think this is things that both companies and individuals can do, but I make investments with Black and brown and women, startups and entrepreneurs, and I do that intentionally. And I'll share one example. There's a African-American woman, Dr. Lisa Dyson. Her company is Air Protein, and she's working on the future of meat. And I met her maybe 3 years ago, and she's a physicist from MIT. So just truly brilliant. 10 years as an entrepreneur, kind of underfunded, and I joined forces with her to help her fundraise. A couple of years ago, we've raised $100 million
Wow.
for this beautiful vision that she had. And if I'm honest with this group, if she wasn't who she was and her biography wasn't what it was, I wouldn't. I've got lots of places to spend my time, but I felt like her story is one that needed to be told, and that's where those are the kind of things that I lend my time and effort to these days. And I think there are many opportunities to do that in the local communities that we're in as business leaders, and that's what gets me excited about the future.
100%. Well, I think that is emblematic of what today is all about. Celebrating downstairs. There's many different businesses and artists and folks that are going to be showing up downstairs for the celebration of Black excellence. And thank you to the Black team for putting this together. And I feel like I spent too much time asking questions, and I would really love to hand the mic.
Hello, how are you doing?
Thank you for being here and sharing your story. I'm Chelsea. I help run our social media here at Honest. So my question is related to that. I thought it was shocking, but sadly not surprising, how when you wrote this book with your daughter, that someone basically said you were giving up your career to do so. And I think I've been at companies before that are really afraid to speak out on racism and social injustice because they are afraid to cut out a subset of their customers in order to speak out. So what would be your advice to those companies that maybe, won't speak out against racism because they're afraid it will hurt their bottom line?
I think the main thing is I think the world has changed. I mean, the one thing that my daughter recognized is that the world has changed, and basically the folks sitting in this room and our consumers that are millennials and Gen Zs, they're going to hold us all accountable differently. So there are many CEOs, 5 or 6 years ago that you could duck these issues. So when I was a public company CEO, you could choose to participate or not choose to participate. I don't think we're in an environment today because the folks sitting in this room are going to hold their leaders accountable. And when they don't find organizations that are going to stand up for issues that they believe in or are consistent with their values, people are going to, choose to take their efforts and their work other places. And that's just a reality that many companies are dealing with today. But with the push from even investors around environmental, social, and governance related issues, these are things that executives and companies will need to face actually head on. Yeah. I'm at Stanford on Monday addressing a group of corporate directors around this topic. And my message for them is they will need to have structures and processes that put them in a position. And not every organization needs to weigh in on every issue, but at least for your own stakeholders, you've got to actually have a point of view organization. And I think the leaders are going to need to build this as a skill set, because we're all operating in a place that nobody learned about in school or business school. But these social issues are going to be real, and they're going to be increasingly more important that, companies, demonstrate what their values are.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Yasmin, and I'm one of the heads of creative partnerships here, and I'm really excited that you're here. My question is, luckily at Honest, I don't have this problem. I'd love to hear our flourished here. But for other people who aren't so lucky, how do you balance bringing your full self to work and being a cultural fit? What's that fine line between being who you are, showing up as who you are and what you have to bring to the table, but also assimilating enough of the culture to be a fit for the company?
I think different today than when I would have been, moving through my career. The best companies are not looking for culture fits; they're looking for culture adds. So you want somebody who's going to be additive to your culture, and that's where the best leaders and the best companies they're saying, where might Yasmin add to our culture? Wow, that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. But the best leaders and the best companies are going to get that. Culture fits are just a way of saying, I'm going to add more of the same, and I'm going to have people that have gone to the same schools or have the same set of experiences. I'm always looking for people that are cultural additions to the teams, and I find them, more enlightened leaders and companies are more focused there. That doesn't answer your specific question of if you don't find that. I just think there are more choices today, and I think, from an employee perspective, we've never had more power, to pick places that are great fits. So that's my viewpoint.
Thank you.
My friend, that sums up our talk. I just like being around you.
Same here.
You just make me so happy. I can feel your vibes. Like I can just feel your warmth. I feel your confidence. I feel your ease, and I also feel your energy around positivity and believing that it can be better tomorrow. I think sometimes I read too much news and I can get pretty bummed out. And sometimes I get in the weeds of life and I overwhelm myself. And I just want to thank you for being a light for all of us.
Well, thanks for having me. I just love the beautiful mission here at Honest. I'm actually humbled to be a part of this team. I think we're just getting started. And I just want to pay the highest compliments to this fantastic team sitting in the audience. We all appreciate, at least in the, from a board perspective, the fantastic work that you guys do to lead this fantastic company and serve our incredible consumers.
Awesome.
So thanks.
Thank you.